moving on. So interferons, so they belong to a big category of proteins called cytokines, but there are many cytokines, there are many, or actually there are several interferons. Your book covers them very generally, so there's interferon alpha, beta, and gamma in your book, and there are several other interferon types that have been discovered. So I think there's interferon delta, there's interferon epsilon, and even omega. So there are many other interferons. Maybe this person who wrote this part didn't really update their knowledge, but interferon, they also have different functions, and actually there's more than just 3 interferons. That's my endpoint. So interferon alpha is produced by cells infected with viruses. So the main thing in general, even though they have slight differences and more specific nuances between interferons, interferons are very important in defending against viruses. So interferon alpha, again, is enhancing resistance. So the thing is that a lot of viruses, they like to, I think if you were here during the neuro part of last semester, some viruses, such as the varicella zoster virus, aka the chickenpox virus, it can actually hide out in your cell's DNA. So not only can it infect your cells, but it can actually encode itself in your cell's DNA, hide out there, and reemerge. So one way that interferon alpha and your cells can defend against viruses is to kind of check its DNA even more. So it can actually stimulate things that help to repair DNA, so you have less chance of this virus actually infecting more and more cells. Now, interferon beta, there's not just one interferon beta. There's interferon beta 1A alpha and interferon beta 1 beta. So again, there are many, many interferons. Don't worry about it for this class. And slows inflammation. So if you have a big like inflammation due to an infection, yes, it will dial it down, but it doesn't quite slow. So interferon beta can actually be either pro or anti-inflammatory depending on the context. I think the best summary or best I've read about interferon beta, so if you don't have an immune response, if you don't have infection, interferon beta actually brings up your immune response. But if you already have like say a high level of inflammation and cytokines, interferon beta actually helps to bring it down a bit. So it's more like a balancer and modulator than something that actually slows inflammation. And interferon gamma, again, so it's stimulating other immune cells. So the thing about interferons, they boost your immune system, but especially in defending against viruses. Like actually, one of the standard treatments for hepatitis C is interferon alpha therapy. Like my best friend's mom, oh, she was like the sweetest. Like, she was so sweet. I mean, and I was like, wait, I was like, Kel, your mom has hepatitis C? And it's the funny thing about, and I was like, wait, hepatitis C, like when you talk about hepatitis C infection these days, you think, okay, these are people who are like drug users or they party hard, they're sharing needles. So I was like, wait, your mom is a sweet Vietnamese lady. How did she get hepatitis C? But the thing about this is like back in the 80s, they did not screen for hepatitis C. So she actually had a blood transfusion from someone who was positive for hepatitis C, and then she became hepatitis C positive because she got the transfusion. Now we screen for hepatitis C, so that doesn't happen these days. So that's why hepatitis C these days is now associated with people who expose each other to each other's blood. So again, so that's interferon alpha because it helps to stimulate NK cells and enhance resistance to viral infection. It's kind of part of the standard best practices for treating hepatitis C. Right, so interferons. Right, so what do I want you to know about interferons? They increase viral defenses and they increase DNA repair. Again, some viruses like to hide out in your cell's DNA, so it makes sense to increase DNA repair. They also increase MHC class 1 and MHC 2 representation. So the thing is that your immune system can also detect viral proteins and foreign proteins and antigens. So these are also important in saying like, hey, I'm infected with something, can you take a look at this? Also increases your NK cell activity, we covered that. Also increases the destruction of infected cells due to NK cell activity. Again, very important in removing abnormal disease cells from your body. And compliment. So compliment. So it's not not talking about saying nice things to someone. And we're not talking about that geometric thing where something complements each other and forms a complete half. So complement is actually a big category of proteins that work together. So complement system, it's a class of proteins. It's not just one protein, it's many types of proteins. They work together, they're very similar, but it's a whole group of proteins. So these remain inactive if not needed. So they're actually one of the proteins that are constantly circulating in your plasma. So remember things like albumin, fibrinogen, and all those lovely proteins as well. So complement is something like those clotting factors and all those other proteins floating around in your blood. So they're always somewhere in your system. But what happens? Well, they remain inactive, but if a pathogen somehow activates one of these proteins, causes a chemical change in these proteins, this activates the proteins in this complement system. So complement in general helps immune cells. It's actually very complicated, but again, I'm just mentioning, hey, this is a thing, but that helps your immune cells. So it includes like degranulation of those mast cells. Also helps to recruit macrophages as well. Macrophages love complement. And the interesting thing about complement, just by being proteins that circulate in your body itself, these proteins, without the addition of any other cells, can actually attack pathogens by themselves, just as proteins. Now, this is your book's example. Do I want you to memorize everything in here? Well, if you're taking that, again, there's a reason why immunology has a whole semester class devoted to it, and it's 400 level. So you probably will have to know complement activation. Again, it's really hard to teach all of this without any biochemistry. But what do I want you to know? Well, notice that they all kind of converge. They have different ways of activating all these complement proteins. So again, classical pathway, lectin, alternative. That's showing you that there's many ways of activating these complement proteins, but they all end up around the same thing. Notice that C3b, that's where they all intersect. And that's where all these where all these paths converge. And then you have these effects of complement activation down here. So phagocytosis, you already know that. Inflammation, and then you have something cell lysis and something called a MAC. So again, this is the other tricky thing about how complement as well. Complement is actually part of your adaptive immune response. So everybody who has a normal immune system, we all produce complement. But antibodies, they're actually part of the adaptive immune response. So is the classical pathway adaptive or innate? It's both. You have both. So think about this. Even though there's like categorization, okay, is it an adaptive immune response or is it an innate immune response? At the end of the day, they work together. It's like just like your computer software. Even though you have the pre-installed operating system and your programs, in the end of the day, they all work together. You don't say like, okay, this is my core software, this is my pre-installed software, this is my installed software. They all work together. This is your computer. Same with your immune system. So this is one example where your innate and adaptive immune response work together. The lectin pathway, so again, here we have the pathogen, so don't worry too much about that. Alternative pathway, again, it's kind of hard to do this without any biochemistry. So again, C3b, that's the common thing. And what do you notice? It's starting to attach to something. This is the surface of something right here. So C3b attachment, this is the common downstream effect of all three pathways. So I like to think of them as like little alarm bells. They're like little GPS trackers. They're like little signals telling your immune system, hey, this thing over here is kind of fishy. It's kind of weird. Why don't you come and take a look at it? So it's like sending a warning signal or a distress signal. So there's a general process called opsonization. So opsonization is just a fancy term that means coating something in your body with something. So say we have a pathogen like this. So say the complement system gets activated, you have all these C3b proteins from the complement system attaching to this pathogen. So now this little bacterium, this little pathogen has all these warning lights and it's sending crazy distress signals to the rest of your body and immune system. So opsonization refers to coding and identifying this targets for destruction. So again, now you have all this complement attached to this bacterium. And again, cells aren't involved at this point yet. So now it's saying like, hey, immune system, come here, take a look at this, destroy this thing. And say, hey, we have our big macrophage, right? Our big eater. So what's it going to do? So then macrophages love complement. They actually love to attach to it, and they love to say like, hey, this thing is covered in complement. I think I'm going to eat it and neutralize it. So yeah, this macrophage is going to get that complement covered pathogen and eat it. Now, complement also does something, so you saw on the previous slide, something called the membrane attack complex, or the MAC. So again, you have these C3b proteins that are a result of complement activation. So the things that C3b can also recruit other complement proteins. So remember those defensins, the ones that poke holes in bacteria, cell membranes? So think about these membrane attack complement, or membrane attack complexes. They actually do form little pores, like little holes as well. So what happens? Well, just like those defenses poked holes in a bacterium and caused them to lyse, same with the membrane attack complex. By poking all these little holes in bacteria, that disrupts their osmotic potential, and then they can burst and die. So again, this is also the cool thing. This is all due to proteins that are actively circulating in your body. Then inflammation we covered last lecture. Again, if you weren't here, there's up on YouTube. Oh, and in terms of